My son-in-law handed me a pen at the kitchen table and said, "Just sign here, Dad. It's just paperwork." The woman from next door knocked on the back door and pressed a folded grocery receipt into my palm. On the back, in shaky ballpoint, "Don't sign anything. Meet me at Denny's on Birch. Booth by the window. Tonight." I looked up. She was already walking back across the yard like nothing had happened. My son-in-law was still smiling at me. "Dad, you good?" I put the receipt in my shirt pocket and picked up the pen. "Just need my reading glasses," I said. Left them upstairs. I hadn't worn reading glasses a day in my life. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without knowing who I am first. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. The kind of job where you sign off on load tolerances and drainage specifications, and you learn early that what's written down is what's real. Everything else is just talk. I retired 4 years ago. My wife, Loretta, died 8 months after that. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and terrible. She was 63 years old, and she made the world's best chicken and dumplings, and she laughed so loud in movie theaters that strangers would start laughing too, without even knowing why. After Loretta, I rattled around the house like a loose bolt in an empty can. My daughter flew in from Phoenix for the funeral and stayed 3 weeks. Then she went back. Her husband, my son-in-law, called every Sunday at 7. At first, those calls were about me. Then they started being about other things, the house mostly. Whether I'd thought about downsizing, whether I had a financial advisor, whether I'd gotten my will updated. I figured that was normal. He's a practical man. He sells commercial real estate, and he thinks about property values the way I used to think about soil compaction ratios. My daughter is the one I worried about less. She's always been steady. She teaches 2nd grade, and she cries at dog food commercials, and she used to bring me soup when I had the flu, even when she was in high school. She's 38 now, and she looks exactly like her mother did at that age. Same dark eyes, same way of pressing her lips together when she's worried. 6 months after the funeral, she called and said they'd been thinking. They wanted to come stay with me for a while. Help me get settled. Figure out the next chapter. I said that sounded fine. They arrived with 3 suitcases and a filing system. The first few weeks were good, actually. My daughter cooked. My son-in-law fixed the gutters without being asked, and I appreciated that. We watched baseball, and I felt less like a loose bolt. But slowly, things started to shift in ways I couldn't quite name. It started with the bills. My son-in-law offered to take them over so I didn't have to deal with the stress. That seemed reasonable at the time. I was behind on a few things after Loretta died, and I hadn't felt like opening envelopes. He set up online accounts, changed the billing address to his email, then it was the investments. My financial advisor of 20 years, a man named Bill who'd helped Loretta and me save enough to actually retire, got a call from my son-in-law asking to be added as a secondary contact. When Bill mentioned it to me at our annual review, my son-in-law was right there in the room, explaining that he was just trying to keep things coordinated. Bill looked at me. I nodded. What else was I going to do? Then there was the doctor. My regular physician retired the winter Loretta died, and I hadn't gotten around to finding a new one. My son-in-law suggested a doctor he knew, a colleague's referral, very highly regarded, taking new patients. I went twice. Both times my son-in-law drove me and came into the exam room, said it helped to have a second set of ears. The doctor, a soft-spoken man with wire-rimmed glasses and a corner office full of diplomas, nodded approvingly. At the second appointment, the doctor mentioned that some of my responses on the intake forms indicated I might be experiencing mild cognitive changes. Nothing alarming, he said. Very common in men my age, especially after significant loss. He recommended a follow-up assessment. I hadn't noticed any changes. I still did the Sunday crossword. I still knew the load capacity of every bridge I'd worked on. I still remembered the name of every teacher I'd had from kindergarten through 12th grade. But grief does strange things. You start to doubt yourself. You forget where you put your coffee mug and you think, is this it? Is this how it starts? I mentioned it to my daughter one evening. She took my hand and said the doctor was just being thorough, that they were all just being careful, that I had worked so hard my whole life, and it was okay to let people help now. She sounded like she meant it. I still believe she meant it. That part matters, I think. The paperwork started small. A form to add my son-in-law to my bank account as a cosigner, in case of emergency. A document to transfer the deed of the property into a family trust for estate planning purposes to avoid probate. A signature authorizing my son-in-law to communicate directly with my brokerage on my behalf. Each one came with an explanation that made sense on its own. Each one I signed because I was tired and because I trusted my daughter and because I have always believed that paperwork is how you protect people you love. I didn't read them closely enough. I know that now. The one at the kitchen table that Thursday afternoon was different, though. Even without my reading glasses, I could see it was longer than the others. More pages. More blanks. My son-in-law had the pen uncapped and ready, and he was talking while he put it in front of me, talking about asset protection and health directives, and how this was just the last piece of the puzzle, just getting everything organized the way it should be. And then the knock at the back door. My neighbor's name is Augustina. She's 72, and she's lived in the yellow house to the left of mine for 11 years. Her husband passed the same year Loretta was diagnosed, and we used to wave at each other from our driveways, with that particular understanding that widows and widowers share. We weren't close friends exactly, more like people who knew same weather. I hadn't thought much about the fact that I hadn't seen her in a couple of weeks until I unfolded that grocery receipt in my upstairs bathroom. Don't sign anything. Meet me at Denny's on Birch. Booth by the window, tonight. I stared at it for a long time. My son-in-law was downstairs. I could hear him moving around, opening and closing the refrigerator. My daughter was at the grocery store. The house was quiet in the way it gets in the late afternoon, when the light goes gold and sideways, and you suddenly notice how loud the silence is. I thought, this is insane. Augustina is just a neighbor. She probably saw something she misunderstood, I thought. But the doctor I've never heard of who thinks I have memory problems, the bills I can no longer see, the deed to my house that now lives in a trust I don't control. I went downstairs and told my son-in-law that I'd been forgetting to return a library book and was going to run it over before they closed. He didn't even look up from his phone. Sure, Dad, dinner's at 6. I got in my car and drove to Denny's on Birch. She was already in the booth, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. She looked smaller indoors than I remembered from the driveway. She looked tired. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said. I almost didn't. I sat down. What is this, Augustina? She reached into her coat pocket and set a folded piece of paper on the table. It was a copy of a legal document. I could see my name on it and a lot of language I recognized from engineering contracts, the kind of dense, legal phrasing that means the exact opposite of what it sounds like it means. My niece is a paralegal, she said. Works for a family law attorney in Dayton. She was visiting me 2 Saturdays ago, and your son-in-law came by to borrow the extension ladder. She saw the paperwork he had with him. He'd left his bag open on the porch. She paused. She took photos. He wouldn't. Leonard. She said my name quietly. The document he was carrying is a durable power of attorney. It gives him full legal authority over your finances, your medical decisions, and your property in the event that you are declared cognitively incapacitated. She pushed the copy toward me. It's already drafted. It just needs your signature and a notarized medical evaluation. I didn't touch the paper. That's not what he said it was. I know. He said it was estate planning. I know what he told you. She looked at me steadily. My niece recognized the form. She's processed them before. This isn't estate planning, Leonard. This hands him complete control if a doctor signs off saying you're not competent. And you've been going to a new doctor. The gold afternoon light through the diner window. My coffee getting cold. The sound of the kitchen somewhere behind me. My daughter, I said. She wouldn't. Augustina was quiet for a moment. I don't think your daughter knows everything, she said carefully. I think she loves you. I think she might believe what he's told her. That was the sentence that cracked something open in my chest. Because that I could believe. Because I know my daughter and I know how much she trusts the man she married, and I know she would never hurt me on purpose. I know that the way I know load tolerances, to the decimal. How bad is it? I asked. My niece made some calls, Augustina said. That doctor you've been seeing? He lost his license in Kentucky 3 years ago for falsifying psychiatric evaluations. He's operating here under a reinstated license, but there are 2 pending complaints with the state medical board. She folded her hands on the table. She also found a property transaction in your county records. Your house has been appraised twice in the last 4 months. Both times, the appraisal company listed a corporate LLC as the requesting party. She slid another page across. That LLC is registered to your son-in-law. I sat there for a minute that felt like 10. I'm an engineer. I've spent my whole career reading documents and finding the load point, the place where the structure either holds or fails. I know when something is built to transfer weight away from the center. I know what that looks like on paper. This was that. What do? I asked. My niece says you need to move before he files anything with the court. Once that power of attorney is notarized and submitted with a supporting medical evaluation, it becomes very difficult to contest. The law treats those documents as legitimate unless you can prove fraud, and proving fraud requires evidence. She met my eyes, but right now, tonight, you have a window. I want to be honest about what I felt driving home. Not just fear. Something uglier. Because when you're 67 years old and you have just sat in a Denny's booth and learned that the person who calls you dad has been quietly building a legal structure to swallow everything you've spent your life accumulating, you don't just feel afraid. You feel stupid. I signed those forms. All of them. I handed over the bills and the brokerage access, and I went to that doctor twice, and I nodded in that exam room while a man who lost his license in another state told me I might be losing my mind. I sat in my car in the driveway for 3 minutes reminding myself that I am not stupid, that the people who get taken by this kind of thing are not stupid, that it works precisely because it comes from inside the house, from the people you die for, and it moves slowly and it always sounds reasonable. Then I went inside and I said dinner smelled great, and I watched baseball and I went to bed. And at 2 a.m, when the house was breathing slow and even, I got up. My son-in-law keeps a laptop in the small room off the kitchen that he converted into a workspace. He's a light sleeper, but he'd had 2 beers with dinner. The door wasn't locked. Augustina's niece had given me specific things to look for. A folder called administrative or similar. Financial projections. Communications with the doctor. Anything connecting the LLC to property transactions involving my name. It took me 20 minutes of staring at a screen with the brightness turned down to almost nothing before I found the folder. He'd named it transition planning, which I will say is either darkly ironic or just practical, depending on how you look at it. There were 11 files. I opened each one just long enough to confirm what I was seeing. A spreadsheet of my assets with estimated liquidation timelines, 3 emails between my son-in-law and the doctor discussing the language in my cognitive evaluation. A draft letter to my brokerage citing power of attorney, and one document that made my stomach go cold, a lease agreement for a memory care facility in a suburb I'd never heard of, predated to begin 30 days from now, with my name in the tenant field. I copied everything to a thumb drive I'd bought that afternoon at the pharmacy on the way home from Denny's. Then I heard the floor creak. My son-in-law was in the doorway. He was in pajamas and he hadn't turned on the light, but there was enough street light coming through the window that I could see his face and he could see what was on the screen. Neither of us said anything for a moment. "Dad," he said. He has a voice that's always very level, very reasonable. That used to make me think he was calm. Now I understood it differently. "You shouldn't be in here." "Probably not," I said. "You're confused. You've been doing this at night lately, wandering, not remembering. We've been worried." He stepped into the room. "Let me help you back to bed." "I'm not confused," I said. "I'm angry. Those are different things." He looked at the laptop screen. He looked at the thumb drive in my hand. "Put that down," he said, and his voice had changed. Transition planning, I said. That's what you called it. My life. Transition planning. You don't understand what's in there. I built infrastructure for 31 years. I understand load-bearing documents. I closed the laptop. This is over. No, he said. It isn't. Because here's what happens if you walk out of this room with that drive. I called Dr. 2, Beckett, first thing in the morning, and we file the evaluation. You've been wandering the house at 2 in the morning going to private files. That goes in the report. Your daughter will corroborate because she's going to believe me over you. And then a judge looks at an evaluation from a licensed physician and a sworn statement from your own family, and you wake up in a suburb you've never heard of. He said it matter-of-factly, the way you'd explain a drainage problem. So put the drive down, go to bed, and we'll all pretend tonight didn't happen. I looked at him for a long moment. He was probably right about some of it. He probably had thought through most of it. He's that kind of man. What he hadn't accounted for was Augustina's niece, who had been busy that afternoon. I spoke to a family law attorney today, I said. Not through you. Not a referral. My own. She has copies of everything on that drive, plus the photos her assistant took of the documents you left on the porch 2 Saturdays ago. I put the thumb drive in my robe pocket. She also contacted the state medical board about Dr. Beckett this evening, and a detective she works with regularly. The room went very quiet. You're bluffing, he said. I'm an engineer, I said. I don't bluff. I verify. My daughter appeared in the hallway behind him. She'd heard voices. She was wearing the same worn-out University of Arizona sweatshirt she's had since college, and she looked young and confused and worried, and she looked so much like her mother that it physically hurt. Dad, what's happening? I looked at my son-in-law. He was looking at my pocket. Ask him, I said. What happened next took weeks to fully unspool, the way these things do. It doesn't happen all at once, like in movies. It happens in lawyers' offices and county clerk windows and long phone calls where someone is putting you on hold while they pull up a file. The attorney, a woman named Rose Callahan, who Augustina's niece had contacted, filed an emergency injunction the morning after their conversation in the office. It froze all transactions tied to my accounts and property pending investigation. Dr. Beckett, when contacted by the medical board, declined to submit the cognitive evaluation. He'd done this before, apparently. He knew exactly when to step back. My son-in-law hired an attorney and said he'd been acting in my best interests, and that I was exhibiting paranoid ideation. His attorney sent a letter to that effect. Rose sent back a 40-page response that included the transition planning files, the emails, the appraisal requests, and a timeline showing that every form I'd signed had moved a specific asset outside my direct control, while leaving the document trail just ambiguous enough to be defensible. It wasn't defensible. Not with all of it together. My daughter didn't know. I want to say that clearly because it's the thing I needed to understand myself before I could say anything else. She knew they were handling my finances. She thought the doctor was routine. She thought the power of attorney was about protecting me in case of a health emergency. She didn't know about the LLC. She didn't know about the lease. She didn't know about the lease. She didn't know her husband had been planning to have me committed to a memory care facility on a 30-day timeline. When Rose showed her the transition planning folder, my daughter sat in that office for a long time without saying anything. Then she started to cry. Not the polite kind. The kind Loretta used to call floor crying, because there's nowhere to go with it and you just end up on the floor. I sat next to her and put my arm around her and didn't say anything for a while. I thought he was helping, she finally said. I know. I told you he was helping. I told you he was helping. I told you to let people help you. I know, Dad, so don't. I tightened my arm around her. You didn't know. That's different from not caring. I know you. She cried some more. I let her. What I didn't tell her until much later is that the part that saved me wasn't the lawyer or the thumb drive, or even Augustina. It was that I'd spent 31 years learning to read what's underneath a document. to look at what a structure is actually built to do, not what it's supposed to look like from the outside. I'd lost practice at that after Loretta died. I'd gotten soft in the places that grief makes soft. But not all the way. Not quite. The investigation took 4 months. It turned out my son-in-law had done this once before, not with family, with an elderly client of his. Commercial real estate, a different mechanism, but the same underlying architecture. Move the assets, control the paperwork, neutralize the person in the middle. That case had settled quietly. The client's family hadn't pushed. He'd walked away with a brokerage fee and lessons learned about covering his tracks. He learned enough to make the second attempt much cleaner. Almost clean enough. He pled guilty on 3 counts of financial fraud and 1 count of filing false documentation. He served 14 months and lost his real estate license permanently. The doctor, the one he'd referred me to, the one with the corner office and the wire-rimmed glasses, was investigated by the state medical board and had his license revoked for the 2nd time. He's contesting it. They usually contest it. My son-in-law and my daughter divorced. That's the part I find hardest to talk about. Not because I feel guilty, but because I don't. And not feeling guilty about something that hurt your child is its own complicated thing to carry. She moved back to Phoenix. We talk 3 times a week. She's been seeing a counselor. She's going to be okay. She's always been steady. My house is mine. The deed is in my name alone. My accounts are mine. Bill, my original financial advisor, is handling everything again, and he's been gratifyingly unsurprised by the whole situation in a way that I think means he's seen it before. Augustina and I have dinner on Wednesdays now. We take turns cooking. She makes a shrimp gumbo that I have not been able to replicate despite 3 attempts and detailed notes, which is humbling for a man who once calibrated drainage coefficients to 4 decimal places. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if she'd minded her business that Thursday afternoon, if her niece hadn't been visiting that particular Saturday. If I'd been 2 minutes faster signing that form before the knock came. I think about the 11 files in the transition planning folder, the lease with my name on it. The suburb I'd never heard of. I think about Loretta, who would have found out somehow. Who would have come to me in a dream, or sent a stranger to knock on a back door, or found some other way to say, "Hold on, pay attention, something is wrong." I believe that. I know it's not rational. I believe it anyway. Here's what I know is rational. This happens more than anyone wants to admit. It doesn't always look like a stranger. It usually doesn't. It usually looks like someone who calls you on Sundays at 7 o'clock and fixes the gutters without being asked, and has a very level, very reasonable voice that makes you think they're calm when actually they're calculating. The signs are the same across every story I've heard since mine. Access to your finances before you've had time to think about it. A new doctor you didn't choose. Paperwork with explanations that make each piece sound unrelated to the others. And a slow narrowing of who you talk to, and what you see, and what you're allowed to know about your own life. If something feels like it's being built around you, even if you can't name the shape of it yet, that feeling means something. I spent my career knowing that structures fail not when they collapse all at once, but when the load distribution has been wrong for years and no one bothered to read the report. Read the report. You know your own mind. Don't let anyone file paperwork that says otherwise. Augustina's gumbo is better than mine, and she knows it, and she is not gracious about winning. Which is one of my favorite things about her. On Wednesday evenings, we sit on my back porch until it gets dark, and we talk about her husband, and about Loretta, and about the particular texture of the years after 70, which are stranger and quieter, and more valuable than anyone tells you when you're young. The ale house next door has a light on at this hour. It always does. I'm glad I drove to that diner. I'm glad she knocked.